No, hi, my name is Farooq Taman, president of Alliance. Oh, thank you. Turn around with the British Council. Thank
You should get my name you should pronounce. You can pronounce. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My apologies. I unfortunately do not have a microphone for the House speakers, and I have a low voice, so I'm sorry, but I will try and speak as loudly as I can. We're very grateful to have you all with us this evening. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2011 Annual Intercultural Ramadan Iftar Dinner, hosted by the Turkic American Alliance and the Rumi Forum. My name is Jenna Ludke. I am a director at the Rumi Forum. We have several delights for you this evening, including Turkish delight. But first, before I do that, tonight we are honored to have members from the Diplomatic Corps with us. Ambassadors from the following countries are with us this evening. Namik Tan, His Excellency of Turkey. The South African Ambassador, His Excellency Ibrahim Rasool. The Ambassador of Iraq, His Excellency Samir Soumaidia. From Senegal, His Excellency Diagne Fatou Danile. Please forgive me if I misread your names. From Mozambique, Her Excellency Amelia Matos Sumbana. From Suriname, His Excellency Subhas Mungara. Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency Dr. Neil Parson. And Timor-Leste, His Excellency Constancio Pinto. So, thank you for being with us this evening. We also have embassy representatives from the following countries: the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, the Republic of Honduras, the Republic of Kazakhstan, the Republic of Macedonia, the Kingdom of Norway, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the State of Qatar, the Russian Federation, the Kingdom of Sweden, and the Tunisian Republic. So welcome to Fiji, yes, and the Fiji ambassador. Welcome. So it's reaching time. So if you all will just draw your eyes to the screen here, we're going to have the call to prayer, the evening call to prayer, which will break the fast as well.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to welcome Mr. Imre Çelik to come and say a few words. He is the president of the Rumi Forum.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Rumi Forum, I want to welcome you as our co-host, and I want to in particular thank
our partners today, Dr. Farooq Taban from the Turkic American Alliance. We are here today around what is a very important feast, a breaking of bread, a sharing and a meal. There are two very important aspects to Ramadan, and both of those encompass the very important concept of improving relations. At a very personal and intimate level, for the practitioner, it is about improving their relation with the Almighty, the Creator. This is done through worship, servanthood, recitation, reflection, and through many other means. The other aspect of improving relations for those practitioners is to improve relations with friends and family, with neighbors, and even with strangers. And the best example of that during Ramadan is in the sharing of the iftar meal. To invite one and all, whether you consider them to be close or known or distant or unknown. And that in essence is the reason that we are here today, to invite both those that know us and those that don't, to improve relations, to come together and work at issues that are common to all of us, and to help improve the community at large. On that note, I want to thank each and every one of you. We look forward to further developing relations and, of course, improving the dialogue between ourselves and between others. Thank you and have a most blessed evening. Good night. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest with us this evening from the White House, Mr. Paul Montero. He is an associate director at the White House Office of Public Engagement. Mr. Montero serves as the liaison to the Arab Americans' faith-based and secular belief communities, and also assists in coordinating the White House Mentorship Program. He worked for then Senator Obama in his Senate office in 2006 before joining the Obama for America campaign in Chicago as the National Deputy Director of Religious Affairs. A graduate of the University of Maryland and the Howard University School of Law, he previously worked at the United States Supreme Court, 2 Washington, D.C. law firms, and spent a year teaching at a local public charter school. Please welcome Mr. Paul Montero.
Assalamu alaikum. Well, good evening, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's an honor to be with you tonight. I've been privileged to attend several iftars in the last few weeks, but each one is refreshing in its own way. And I know that this isn't your first iftar, so I'll be sure to keep my remarks brief. But I would like to thank Jenna and Dr. Farooq Taban for your kind hospitality, and recognize my friend and colleague, Rashad Hussain from the White House on the National Security Staff and the Special Envoy to the OIC. And tonight I also want to start by recognizing the freedom fighters across the Atlantic who are working to achieve a real democracy after 42 years of dictatorship. And as we take a moment tonight to break the fast and remember our obligations to our God and to each other, it's important to remember our brothers and sisters who are literally fighting there for the liberties that we enjoy in this country tonight. Here in the United States, we do celebrate our democracy every day. This president and this administration have an unshakable commitment to those fundamental tenets that make this country what it is. To be very clear, we do have significant challenges here at home in this messy democratic process, and our history contains episodes where we did not live up to the best of our ideals. And trust me, our Justice Department Civil Rights Division is working overtime to combat bigotry and hatred that seeks to infringe on the rights of others because of their beliefs or their appearance. But it is still a world wonder that in a nation of more than 300 million people, from different races and religions and classes and cultures and creeds, that we continue to exist and thrive. It is especially impressive when you consider the experience of other nations that are fraying at the seams today because of religious conflict and strife. And we don't have to look very far to see societies that are under enormous stress and strain because of economic hardships that exacerbate tensions based on cultural misunderstanding or religious intolerance. It's a reminder that cross-cultural understanding doesn't happen by itself in many cases. And unfortunately, it would seem that human beings have an inclination to find differences in our neighbors and look at criteria by which we can separate ourselves into us and them. The criteria might be eye color or skin color or gender or religion. But our history is a reminder that cooperation and acceptance is not a given when human beings are involved. Now, in 6 days from now, the President will recognize on the National Mall the dedication of the first monument dedicated to an African American, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as Jenna mentioned, I attended a historically black law school here in Washington, Howard University School of Law. And this is a place that was founded on the idea that an enslaved and oppressed African American minority deserved and would benefit from an education that would improve their lot and the lots of future generations. And for decades, our nation sanctioned separate but equal facilities in education, in commerce, and in housing, and in so many other spheres of public life. But education was different in that it was fundamental to forming ideas of self in the minds of children. And now at Howard, we studied the legal strategy of the civil rights movement every year that we were there, looking at Brown versus Board of Education, the case that ultimately said that separate but equal is inherently unconstitutional. But we also studied the subsequent decades of litigation that came after Brown, when you looked at the questions of how do you actually integrate two societies that for hundreds of years lived separate and apart. Cases that question how do you actually enforce the meaning of Brown in a constitutionally permissible way. And one of my professors in law school boiled down all of the theory around these decades of litigation to one single but powerful idea. It wasn't a fight to get enough funding for black schools. It wasn't a fight to mandate equal money for both so that folks would recognize that everyone was equal. The key was the idea that a system of racial superiority or inferiority could not survive when children of multiple races were placed in the same room. Stereotypes and bias about an entire race would be challenged when children of different races were sitting next to each other. The power of a myth of racial superiority would be exposed when those from different backgrounds knew one another. And that's why the work that you do, intentionally promoting an understanding of the richness of Turkish culture and an understanding of Islam to the broader public, is so important. The times we are living in are obviously challenging. We are quickly approaching, as you know, the 10th anniversary of the attacks that devastated our homeland and marked so many parts of the decade since. Yet still the levels of anti-Muslim sentiment are at all-time highs. We continue to see intolerance spring up in various parts of the country. In Tennessee, for example, where houses of worship have, as a matter of right, the ability to expand their buildings, a mosque's application to build a larger worship space was rejected, not because of space, but because, in their view, Islam was not a religion. It was a political ideology. And I know our Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Tom Perez, was proud to file a brief asserting that Islam was indeed a religion. But in the 21st century, it shouldn't take a brief from the Department of Justice to assert that Islam is one of the world's greatest religions and one of our country's greatest religions. The levels of bullying and harassment in schools, the anti-Sharia legislation we see in many states, make it clear that so much work remains. But the federal government cannot do it alone. And that's why your efforts at sharing the contributions that Turkish Americans have made to our nation for decades is important. The achievement that the community has seen is an example of the opportunity that the United States still extends to those from around the world and their families. The iftar you host tonight is another chance to share the beauty of Islam with a community that is still learning. And now, in the case of civil rights, the government, again, can't do it alone. And that is why, or one reason why, Dr. King and so many other patriots risked their lives to push this nation to live up to our ideals. And it was not an accident that those who were pushing the hardest and speaking the loudest were people of faith, religious people who knew that the stakes were not simply who got to go to a particular school or to live in a particular neighborhood. The real stakes were moral, in determining whether we would be a country that saw some as being human and others as less than. And our ultimate success will not be determined by words from Washington. It will come from dialogues happening in states like Tennessee and indeed every other state. Now, many times subsequent movements have invoked the civil rights movement as analogous to their efforts to achieve equal rights in this country. But I think it is an especially apt analogy to draw those same parallels to the collective work that we are engaged in to create a more perfect union described in our founding documents and spoken of often by our president. And I found in my short time at the White House, you can never go wrong quoting the president. And in his remarks at the White House Iftar a few weeks ago, he said it better than I could. And he described an America that doesn't simply tolerate people of different backgrounds and beliefs, but where we treat one another with respect and decency, remembering that here in the United States, there is no them and us, it's just us. An America where our fundamental freedoms and inalienable rights are not simply preserved, but continually renewed, among them the right of every person to worship as they choose. An America that stands up for dignity and rights of people around the world, whether they are a young person demanding his or her freedom in the Middle East or North Africa, or a hungry child in the Horn of Africa, where we are acting to save countless lives. So as I take my seat, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing, the difficult work that it's going to take to address the roots of misinformation and bigotry in this country. And I hope that at some point in the near future, we will make it a reality. Ramadan Kareem. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Now I would like to ask His Excellency Ibrahim Rasool to come and speak.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. I want to thank our hosts, the Turkic-American Alliance and the Rumi Forum, for hosting us here this evening and showing us the everyday face of Islam and Muslims. I want to acknowledge the presence of my fellow diplomats and ambassadors, especially the Turkish one, Ambassador Chan. I want to greet representatives from the White House and the State Department, from a variety of institutions and communities represented here. I think Ramadan is probably the one month that if you were to have a dipstick to understand what Islam is and what Muslims are, and you would apply that dipstick, you would see what is the body politic of the global Muslim community. You would find people fasting, praying, and helping others. And that should be the defining feature of Islam and Muslims in the world today. Because for them and for us, Ramadan is that month in which we develop our capacity for restraint and discipline, in which we celebrate the revelation of the Quran, and in which, in the words of God in the Quran, God's ears are open to the call of everyone who calls on God. And God challenges us to make a special effort also to listen to the call of God, because when you are freed up from bodily needs and you have divested yourself from worldly encumbrances, and you have denigrated your body through fasting, it is in that moment that your soul emerges, and you listen with the ears of your soul to the highest spiritual values that God demands of all of us. And that becomes the essence of the conversation between human beings and God. We often don't hear God, and we often don't do the things which are based on the values which are divine, because we are slaves to the bodily needs that we engage in every day. And over 1 billion Muslims have attuned their souls not only to communicate with God, but to listen to the values that God wants us to live with. And I explain this simply to say that this is the great middle ground in the world of Islam. Fasting to inculcate discipline and restraint, engaged with reading and understanding the Quran, and in a great conversation with our Creator. It is this moment when that middle ground stands separate from, on the one hand, mere formalistic imitation that often comes from orthodoxy and unable to respond to the global needs and the changing times in which we live. On the other hand, the siren songs of a destructive, fundamentalist extremism. And it is in moments like this that this middle ground emerges to be the greatest advert of what it means to be Muslim in the world today. The energy of this middle ground is constituted by their security in their faith. And it is this security of faith that allows that middle ground of Muslims to reach out to others, to engage in dialogue, to participate in interfaith relations, to not fear multiculturalism, to be able to do good irrespective of differences in background. And all of it emerges because of a secure faith, which is made even more secure through the month of fasting. It is this middle ground whose energy comes from the fact that they are, in the first instance, spiritual beings, rather than beings competing for interests, for worldly gain. Spiritual beings in direct communication with their Creator, able to imbibe the best values, even against themselves, in order to live lives of tranquility and harmony in the world in which we find ourselves. And the third element of this energy comes from building partnerships in order to make the world a better place. Not because it is convenient, opportunistic, or interest-based, but because it is demanded of every human being. In fact, the essence of Sharia, such a feared concept, particularly in the United States and all over the world, it is not a system of laws that governs what you do with women and what you do with infidels and how you create jihad and all of those kind of things. But at its core, the scholars of Islam agree that Sharia is to be a benefit for humanity and to ward off harm from humanity. Everything else around that is detail. And it is detail sometimes appropriated by those trapped in orthodoxy and therefore propagating views of Sharia of 1400 years ago. But it is also contested by fundamentalist extremists who want to appropriate it to totalize their control over society. It is nothing different from any other ideology, any other faith, any other community in the world. What we struggle with, you struggle with. What you struggle with, we struggle with. And rather than being on opposite sides of this divide, we need to understand that fundamentalism in every ideology is the enemy of humankind wherever it is. And so, it is this middle ground where Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, many hundreds of years ago, understood would reach moments when our search for material well-being would create in us vacuums, spiritual vacuums, vacuums from the divine, and created an understanding and a practice of Islam that would forever keep our souls sharp, keep our spirits high, and keep us in communication with the divine, so that we may always understand the higher purposes for which we have been created. It is this tradition that the Rumi Forum tries to keep alive and tries to inculcate a religion of the soul, a religion of spiritualism, and trying to fill the vacuums that we try in other ways to fill through consumerism and through constant engagement with our interests. It is the same middle ground that draws on the work of someone like Fathullah Gulen, who has understood how, on the one hand, sometimes orthodoxy does not take you into the world that we find ourselves in today, and how fundamentalism is a siren song that tempts us away from doing good, and how one can combine this deep spiritualism with a way to live in the world today, to live in dialogue with each other, to live integrated with each other, where we respect, respectively, the integrity of one and the integrity of all. How we become Muslims and Americans at the same time, where we respect America's need to maintain the integrity of its nation, but America respects our need to keep an identity that comes from being Muslim. And so it is with every other community. It is this kind of combination of the works of Rumi and the writings of Fathullah Gulen that allows us to navigate these troubled times in a world that globalizes. But as it globalizes, it creates melting pots where every different value, where every different identity can sometimes be melted down in order to create a deadening uniformity across the world and rob us of the beauty of the multitudes of humanity that we find ourselves in. At the same time, it's a response to those who, if you do not join that melting pot, would want to isolate you and alienate you as the other. And the other finds many different ways to do the same thing. The other is alienated and isolated through Islamophobia, through xenophobia, through racism, through sexism, through homophobia, through a range of different instruments to demonize, alienate, and isolate the other, because we don't know, in a world that is globalized, how to deal with each other's differences. On an occasion like this, we must respect the integrity of each other as the precondition for coexistence in the world in which we live. Nothing brings us closer to that than the practice of Ramadan, in which Muslims have to not only divest themselves of food, but have to divest themselves of prejudice, have to divest themselves of hatred, have to stand up for justice, firstly against ourselves, before we can stand up against tyrants, have to reform firstly ourselves, before we may want to reform societies. And that, I think, is the beauty of sharing iftar with all of us in one room under the banner of both the Turkic-American Alliance as well as the Rumi Forum. Those two could not have come together in a better way than to invite us and to be able to share such beautiful insights with all of us in a world that is deeply troubled. It's an exciting world, but if we're going to navigate this world, and especially what is happening in countries of the traditional Islamic world today, in the Middle East, we are going to have to make sure that we navigate the ship in such a way that we renounce what is unsustainable in the form of regimes that have totalized all power for themselves, without democracy, without human rights, and without being able to look after the people, but at the same time navigate the ship so that we also avoid the undesirable. And that is those who want to totalize in completely different ways. Those are the challenges that we face, and this is the best Ramadan to raise our voices so that our Creator can hear us, but at the same time open our spiritual ears so that we too can hear what is expected of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Rasul. Now I would like to ask Mr. Johan Vibe to come to the podium to say a few words. He is the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Norway. Please welcome him.
Good evening, everybody, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored and also a bit humbled to have been asked today by the Rumi Forum and the Turkic-American Alliance to say a few words on the importance of unity and diversity in the light of the recent attacks in Norway. Let me first thank the American government and the people and other governments here represented for their condolences and massive support after the horrific events on July 22nd in Oslo and the island of Utøya. Special thanks to the Rumi Forum, who also sent messages of support. We have been going through a very tough period of national mourning that culminated yesterday in a national memorial event with the families of the victims. Many other countries have experienced larger terrorist attacks than this one in Norway, but for a small nation like Norway that until July 22nd had been spared from terror, it had an immense impact. Every community, every county was struck. Our Muslim community was also hit, and Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu attended the funeral of one young girl of Turkish descent who was brutally killed at Utøya while exercising her political rights. Emerging from all this grief, we do, however, see some hope. And needless to say, this event, we still really haven't come to terms with it in Norway, but at least I think there are some reflections we can make already. And one element of hope I see is that the sense of national unity has maybe never been stronger than today. I was myself in Norway with my family during the attack and in the days that followed, and participated with my family in the biggest demonstration ever downtown Oslo. It was the most moving public event I've ever participated in. And best of all, this demonstration was a spontaneous act, put together by a private citizen who used social media to call people to action. We were more than 200,000 people. Everybody carried roses, and when they held them up in the air, Oslo was transformed into a sea of flowers. This was a very powerful and universal symbol of our support to the families of the victims, our total rejection of the terrorists, but also our common wish to protect and strengthen our democracy and the integration of all members of our community. People did not respond with a wish for vengeance, but with a wish for a society where we take better care of each other across social and cultural divides. Another element of hope that I see is that participation, political participation, has acquired a whole new meaning in Norwegian society after the attacks. People seem to understand now that even in a peaceful and well-established democracy, you cannot take your civil rights for granted. More people, especially young people, are now joining political parties and other organizations. And in the upcoming elections next month, we are expecting very high levels of participation. It has been especially moving to listen to young activists that survived the massacre at the island, who feel more committed now than ever to help making this world a better place. They have not been scared off by the brutal attack, fortunately. The people of Norway and the government have also been very clear that we do not wish to let this terrorist act force us into a more closed society, where politicians and democratic institutions are separated from the people through heavy security. Which of course is a very difficult choice, because it may seem almost a bit naive, but it's something that has come very strongly through. I would say it also been a time for reflection about how we handle diversity in our country. Norway is known for its emphasis on equality, but we have a lot to learn when it comes to handling diversity. Immigration, cultural and religious diversity are fairly recent phenomena in Norway. Economic integration has gone fairly well because we are living in a very privileged economic situation. But we definitely could do a better job when it comes to including newcomers in what we now call the Norwegian we, the new we, which was also alluded to in your intervention. We need to acknowledge that there is opposition to immigration in our society, and we need to deal with it. We believe that those who experience fear of the unknown, or new religions, new people, should come forward and express it. But the recent attacks have also shown the dangers of confining this kind of debate to secretive internet communities where virtual worlds of senseless hatred are created. We need an open debate where we can be able to keep everybody accountable for what they are saying and what they are expressing. Just as we recognize the need for an open national dialogue on diversity, we believe that we also need a more open international dialogue on issues that divide the world. In the last decade, many seem to believe that diplomacy and dialogue are tools of limited utility, and that talking to a group or country whose ideas and values we do not share is the same as legitimizing their goals and ideology. Some even see dialogue as a sign of moral and military weakness. Talk, of course, cannot solve every conflict or replace military power. And Norway also participates in international military operations to establish peace when it's needed. Dialogue often needs to be combined with pressure of some kind, but channels for dialogue should always be kept open. We strongly believe that skillful engagement holds the possibility of moderating policies and behavior around the world. So, and these things have been very important in Norwegian foreign policy in the later years, and I would say that definitely the attacks that occurred now this summer have very much strengthened our belief in this tool of international diplomacy. So for this reason, I'm very happy to be here tonight and to be able to share this Iftar view with all of you, and also to express the support for the values that Rumi represent, and also the Turkic-American alliance. So thank you so much.
Now I'd like to ask Ambassador Namik Tan, the Ambassador to Turkey, to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you, everybody. It's always said that if you speak last, you got a problem. Because everything to be said has already been said. So, but just allow me to make a few remarks. First and foremost, our world is getting smaller and smaller every day. That makes us compelled to live with each other more closely. The space is getting narrower for all of us. Therefore, we need to cooperate with each other in order to live peacefully in a period of more dialogue, more understanding, more cooperation, more support to each other, and every kind of interdependence, or every element of interdependence should be with us. In that sense, we need to understand each other better. As my Norwegian colleague very well expressed, we need to leave aside all our prejudices. We need to help each other We need to forget about extremism. We need to know that if we don't share, if you do not just observe those needs that I have been telling you, I think then the challenge gets bigger and bigger. And one time may come, it will just swallow all of us into it, sucks everyone into it. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I think in recent days, especially, we have really been going through a very difficult time. You may be living 10,000 kilometers away from our home region. 10,000 kilometers away. I just want all of you to take a moment and think about where we are as Turkey. We are in the middle of every difficult problem, every conflict, every challenge that may come into your mind. Starting from Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Middle East, Lebanon, Libya, Tunisia, Balkans, Caucasus. We're right in the middle. So the best tool that we can use, as we are trying to demonstrate, is our soft power. I'm not talking about the smart power. I think there is no alternative, or there is no such alternative anymore. We have to have a small, I think, soft power. By force, by some extremist policies or moves, you may not just communicate any of your thoughts or I think beliefs to anyone. The only thing is the engagement, dialogue, and everything that I proudly would say Islam teaches us, and which are, I think, eloquently put forward by my South African colleague, and I thank him wholeheartedly. And one last word, we don't have any better alternative. We don't have any alternative, not better, not worse. We have to, I think, try to embrace each other. We have to try to understand each other. We have to try to love each other. We have to respect each other. We have to help each other. So these things, these values, we have to forgive each other. We have to ask forgiveness for the things that we have done, we may have done wrong. We have to say sorry. We have to just ask for, I think, help. We have to apologize. These are the human values. We don't have any other alternative. Therefore, today, as we sit and have our iftar dinner, these are the things, at least in my lifetime, from my childhood until now, that are told to us by our elderly people. So that's how we try to share these, I think, teachings within such a friendly and peaceful iftar night. And we have to learn it from each other. Everybody has something to learn from the other. In that sense, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation and thanks to Rumi Forum and also Turkic American Alliance for co-hosting this wonderful night in order to try to display to you how we do our own iftar nights and how much we can just come closer from every representative from every walk of life. So I thank you very much, and I thank all my colleagues who are present here. I want to thank also the members of the administration, from White House to State Department and from other agencies coming and sharing this festive divine night with us. Thank you very much.